Alright, everybody, hello. I tried to do this a couple times, so I really hope that it worked out this time, because I'm not really the best with technology. But my topic that I chose was the infamous Karen Horney, and if you haven't heard about her, then you'll hopefully learn something from this presentation. Um, okay, so if we get started, the eternal question, who was Karen Horney? So she was originally born in Germany in the 1800s, late 1800s, and she came from a very dysfunctional family. And when I say that, basically, she did not have a great relationship with her dad, who was like a sailor who was out all the time and drunk and not close to the family. Her mother clearly favored her younger brother because there was an emphasis in her family on men and what they could bring, and she was constantly pining for her mother's love, but it just didn't really work out the way that she wanted it to. And like many of the people we've talked about in the history of founding psychology, that definitely influenced her theories and things like that. She was very driven. She's famous for a quote that's like, if I can't be pretty, then I will be smart. And, I think that reflects some of the values and the gender pressures to look a certain way, but she thought that in her control she could, advance really far, and she went to medical school, which was very uncommon for women at the time, and very intelligent, rose to top of her class, went on to be a very, successful psychoanalyst and things like that. One of the best parts about her was that she was really not afraid to challenge the man, and I would put that in quotations because, very prominent men, which we'll get to later in this presentation, who other people might not have, other men might not have wanted to challenge them just based on their holding and the ideas and the theories and things like that, but she was not afraid to do that, and I think that was awesome. And she came up with like a new waves in psychoanalysis is basically one of her works. That's literally the title. But she was a pioneer in her own right. While she, refuted some things of Freud, she also built upon like the foundation that he helped lie. And I like this quote of hers too: "A normal being does not exist," and I think that fits her well because she definitely was not the most normal of human beings. The issues that stemmed from her dysfunctional family went on to carry over to her, family when she got married. Her relationship fell apart with her husband very quickly. She was not close to her daughters at all, who grew up, with similar, wanting love from their mother and not receiving it in this vicious cycle, which is one of the things that I don't necessarily like about Karen Horney. But then she kind of went on to have lots of torrid sex affairs and kind of just embrace her sexuality with younger men, and something that was very not respected at the time for women to do. Even obviously, still to this day, women face slut shaming and things like that. But she went and did it because that's what she wanted to do. So I think that sex positivity is great. So when I wrote this paper, my thesis statement was basically trying to tie in different themes throughout the course that we've learned. So I basically said that the zeitgeist or Zeitgeist, I'm not quite sure the pronunciation because we obviously meet online, it both hindered and facilitated her contribution to the field of psychology as a woman. So on a micro or a macro level, she had to navigate strict gender norms that were, in the centuries that she was living in, about the differences between men and women. But then on the micro level, she also had to combat gender expectations as being, a second-born daughter in her family of origin, where there was a heavy emphasis on her brother and men and their stature in society in general, and then also with her colleagues, because she was one of the first neo-Freudian psychoanalysts who was a woman, and that definitely influenced her career, and she had to kind of almost work 2 times as hard to get her ideas out there. And this right here is just a picture of her with a makeshift queen crown, because I just feel like she's such a queen. Okay. So while I can't get into everything from my paper in this presentation, I think it's important to note that she did have some, beef with prominent men, and also talk about the really cool feminist ideals that she brought to the table. The first prominent man that she struggled with was Freud. As we know, Freud was a psychoanalyst. He, the father of psychoanalysis and things like that. So Karen Horney did not like his idea of biological determinism. She was much more of a fan of nurture helps define or helps determine human behavior, and we're not just the result of our genes and our evolution and things like that. She thought that there was much more choice involved and much more environment involved than Freud did. Most popularly, she disagreed with his idea of penis envy, which is obviously a very controversial aspect of Freud's theories. And she's not alone in disparaging that, but she went as far to suggest another kind of envy, which would be womb envy, suggesting that women don't want a penis. They, men want to be able to carry a child. And that is one of the reasons for the problems in their brains and their behavior and things like that. That did not catch on as much as penis envy did, but I think it's great how she really just flipped it on its head, and Freud was definitely not happy about that. Another person she had beef with was Adler, actually. They agreed on a lot of things, but one of the things that they disagreed about was this, phenomenon of the masculine protest, which basically says that women are in need of validation due to their inferior status in society, which leads them to develop neurotic symptoms and character disorders. And while Horney agreed that there were clear differences in the stature and social stature of men and women in society, she did not think that that was the only reason why women had character disorders or neurotic symptoms. She thought it was much more complicated than that. Kind of similar to her thinking is more complicated than biological determinism. She thought that these men did not give credit to the female psyche, and thinking about the ways in which women are resilient and overcome these gender roles and stereotypes and things like that. And then moving on, it was really interesting to see how her personal life, in terms of the toward affairs and not really wanting to settle down with one man and things like that were expected during that time, how that influenced her theories on female sexuality. Because she put out the bold assertion that women actually enjoy sex, and they're not just doing it to appease their male partners or for procreation or things like that. And that was not something that was really talked about very often. That was not something that was valued during that time. And honestly, to this day, people still struggle with that concept. There are plenty of studies that talk about how women are confined in their sexual expression, whether that is through having multiple partners, whether that's not wanting to get married because they don't want to be monogamous, whether that's in the form of masturbation and things like that. So, in conclusion, thinking about this, obviously you can't cover everything that Karen Horney has done, but a lot of scholars find her to be one of the founding feminist figures in psychology. She's not someone who comes up as much as Freud, but she also contributed to psychoanalysis, and she also contributed to our field, and I feel like she's just a really important, awesome figure for people to look up to. I think she was a badass. I think she was far ahead of her time in terms of her thinking about gender roles, female sexuality, and challenged powerful men in the field with ease. And I think the more we talk about her, the more we realize that it was so uncommon for women to found our field, because all the people we've talked about all semester, almost, besides Anna Freud and a couple of others, have been men. And imagine how our field would be different now. And I wonder if that's part of the rise of feminist therapy and narrative therapy and all of the newer wave therapies like ACT and DBT, were largely influenced by women. If that shift in thinking would have happened in the zeitgeist of the 1800s, I would say not. And then a final Karen Horney quote to kind of finish out. Rationalization may be defined as self-deception by reasoning. And I just really like that one. Doesn't really relate to much else, but I just feel like she's got some good one-liners. Thank you for listening. And yes.